Chapter 22 of Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Sheeler. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 22. More and Less Developed Spirits. Inasmuch as we are said to be spirits here and now, just as much as we ever will be, we should begin the course of progressive development here in this life, which we intend to follow later. Anything we learn here will doubtless help us in any future development, whatever that may be. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, sympathy, and penetration of perception will all help, assist, and advance us, no matter what world we may inhabit or whatever its nature may be. This being the case, we should endeavor to develop our own inner nature here and now, as suggested especially in the chapter on self and soul culture. And we should continue this so far as lies within our power, even after we have crossed the Great Divide. Why strangers often communicate. Just as there are all kinds of characters and natures in this life, so there are said to be individuals of all kinds in the next. And the unfortunate part of it is that many of those who can most easily come back and communicate are those on the lowest rung of the ladder, those who are the most earthbound and belong to the lowest strata of society. They are nearer the earth than more advanced spirits, more in sympathy with it and its vibrations, and their character being more earthly is naturally more open to receive and send messages than those who, when alive, had less sympathy with the earth and felt less bound to it. It is for this reason that strangers often communicate with us more easily than our nearest and dearest, than our friends or relatives. The latter may feel for and with us most keenly, and may long to communicate, but often obstacles hitherto undreamed of may prevent them from doing so. They then find for the first time, and to their astonishment, that the difficulties of communication are so great that they are unable to send messages, however much they may desire to do so, and even if they can find a medium suitable to receive them. The conditions for communication. You, on your side, may be receptive to these conditions, and again you may be unfitted to sense anything of the kind. The combination of circumstances for the transmission of spirit messages is rare, and in order for these messages to be clear, as we should desire them, there must be an effort both on this side and on the other, made at the same moment. Also, there must be the medium. As this combination is naturally lacking in the majority of cases, you can see why it is that authentic cases of spirit return are, comparatively speaking, so rare, and why it is that more persons do not come back. No doubt you have often heard the objection that if spiritualism were true, out of all the millions of people who have died wishing to communicate, there must be many thousands who could return directly and state clearly what they wish to send. What we have said above will explain the reason why this is not the case. The ability to transmit a message from the other side may be as rare as the ability to receive it on this side. Good communicators may be as rare as good artists, painters, or sculptors. It may be a special faculty which we have to develop, and just as uneducated and ignorant persons often possess extraordinary gifts and talents in certain directions, for no reason we can see, just so certain individuals may become good mediums or communicators after they have passed over, simply by reason of their psychic constitution or makeup. The question of the difficulties of communication will be found fully discussed in Chapter 24. Why low or evil spirits communicate. It is because of all this that we often reach or come into contact with persons of a low order in spirit communications. Mediums believe that there are tramps and hobos on the other side just as much as there are in this life. By nature and by instinct, they remain the same, and they have to be gradually educated and trained in order to outgrow their natural instincts. And just as these tramps and hobos would be insulting and often disgusting in this life, and would swear, curse, and do other things unsuitable for the family circle were they introduced into it, just so they do the same things when they communicate and get once more into the earth atmosphere. These are the characters who also harm mediums unconsciously by rough handling, so to speak, and by damaging the delicate nervous organism upon which they operate when sending messages. The best and safest way to guard against personalities of this character, we are told, is to call to your aid spirit controls, guides, or advisors who can assist you from the other side by arguing with such personalities and by removing them from your aura more or less forcibly should the occasion demand it. There are many cases on record in which more gentle measures did not bring about the required result, and according to accounts received, very forcible methods had to be resorted to in order to eject these strangers before peace and harmony were finally restored. High spirits and their helpful messages. When spirits of a higher order come, all this is reversed. You then come into contact with spiritual natures, and help, comfort, sympathy, and sound advice are given. When once you are assured of the assistance and cooperation of one or more individuals of this character, your time of tribulation as a medium is more or less over, and thenceforward you may depend upon steady and harmonious progression and advancement in your mediumship. You must be careful, however, as to how you receive messages claiming to come from exalted personages, as great names will often be given when the individuals in question are not there at all. This may be due at times to accident and misunderstanding, but there is also evidence, unfortunately, that lying spirits will resort to this stratagem to gain your confidence. You should, in this case, rely on your own common sense and judgment, and insist upon proof of identity and direct evidence before you believe that the individual in question is really there. Guardian spirits. There is one sect or division of spirits whose office and general work and interest is particularly helpful to mortals, and that is the so-called guardian angels or guides who help govern and advise friends of theirs still in the body. The sympathy and counsel offered by these guardian spirits is at times very great. These spirits are said sometimes to prevent accident, suicide, and even murder by their kindly help and assistance. It is one of the most beautiful and inspiring thoughts in the spiritualistic philosophy to believe that those we love are constantly about, helping and cheering us along our hard and narrow way, and that they see our trials and tribulations and share them with us, just as they did on earth. We must feel, too, that they are preparing a place for us, and that when it comes time to solve the great mystery, we shall find helpful and loving assistance, instead of a foreign land into which we shall then enter. Who make the best communicators? Those who possess a simple, open, candid, childlike nature are doubtless those who make the best communicators, other things being equal. It is because of this that Indians who lived close to nature so constantly communicate and act as guides, and doubtless for the same reason, Negroes are very psychic and receive many psychic phenomena. There is a great deal of evidence also, as we know, to show us that animals perceive spirits and psychic manifestations, and that they also sense phenomena more keenly than human beings. Between animals and ourselves, there is doubtless a link which unites us all into one conscious whole, this being the life of the universe which runs through every sentient thing. It is not uncommon for spirits to return at seances and seek the prayers or the help of the living. They express themselves as being in trouble and as requiring assistance before they can free themselves and proceed on their way. This is doubtless an important mission to fulfill, and when any wandering and distressed spirit makes itself manifest in this way, it should certainly be assisted in every way possible in the fulfillment of its desire and the discharge of its burden. Many cases of so-called haunted houses doubtless exist because of the persistent inability of the returning spirit to make anyone present see its wants and attend to them. Were a good psychic or medium introduced into such a house, who could get into communication with the returning spirit, and when communication had been established, help it, there is no doubt that the haunting would cease, and the returning spirit would be greatly helped in its progress and advancement. Haunted houses and pacts. All this is especially important in those cases of so-called pacts, where an agreement is made before death to appear afterwards, if that be possible. Many cases of this character are on record, and whenever such an agreement is made, it is most important that the living person on earth should fulfill his part towards the fulfillment of such a plan. By doing so, he may assist to an extent he perhaps does not realize in freeing the spirit's mind from earthly ties and conditions. Possibly unconscious messages. In considering this question of returning spirits, one final and important fact must not be lost sight of, and that is that messages may often be given through a medium or directly, of which the spirit himself may be totally unconscious. He may think or dream or visualize a certain thought or message, and this may be reached or sensed by the medium, and given forth as a conscious and intentional message. The reverse of this, however, is true. The mind of the discarnate spirit has been read by the medium in trance. His mental pocket has been picked, and he has given nothing voluntarily. Further, his thoughts may have been reflected upon a sort of psychic mirror or atmosphere, and they're seen and interpreted by the psychic. This, however, is a difficult question which will be discussed in a later chapter. For the present, it should be borne in mind that all messages given by mediums need not necessarily be direct or intentional. They may merely have been obtained indirectly from the person in question, and would not be at all the message he would send were he aware of the fact that he was transmitting one. It is because of this fact that many of the messages appear to us so trivial and inconsequential. End of chapter 22. Recorded by Cynthia Sheeler. Website cynthiasheeler.icanvoice.com.
23 of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Krantz. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Obsession and Insanity. In this chapter I desire to place before the reader in a fair and clear manner facts which are too often neglected by spiritualists, but which those who develop or become mediums are apt to find out to their cost later in their development, unless they are aware of the facts at the beginning. Truth is always best, and it is accordingly best for the student to know the dangers and difficulties attendant upon spiritualism as well as the bright side. We do not wish to alarm or divert from interest any student by this and the following chapters. Precisely the reverse. But inasmuch as forewarned is forearmed, the student should be familiar with all the possible risks he is running, as there are such risks if he does not develop his mediumistic power systematically and along the right lines, as so often pointed out before in this book. The reality of spirit obsession. As we saw in the last chapter, it is often easier for the low and less developed spirits to come in touch with us than those more highly developed, and this is especially the case where mediumistic development has not been such as to bring the student in touch with the higher forces and intelligences. Modern science does not accept the doctrine of spirit obsession as true, claiming that the cases of so-called spirit influence are really only cases of diseased mind and body, requiring for their cure proper medical attention. Experienced spiritualists, however, know that while many cases of apparent obsession may be accounted for in this manner, there are also cases of real influence coming from less developed, disembodied spirits, and as great a psychologist as Professor William James said shortly before his death, the refusal of modern enlightenment to treat possession as a hypothesis to be spoken of as even possible in spite of the massive human tradition based on concrete experience in its favor, has always seemed to me a curious example of the power of fashion in things scientific. That the demon theory, not necessarily a devil theory, will have its innings again is to my mind absolutely certain. One has to be scientific indeed to be blind and ignorant enough not to suspect any such possibility. Dr. L. Navias, after an exhaustive study of the cases of demon possession in China, and after an examination of contrary theories, stated his conclusion that genuine cases of obsession were to be found, and that they could not be accounted for by any other theory satisfactorily. Examples of obsession. Take again the case recorded by Dr. J. Godfrey Roper in his Dangers of Spiritualism. He gives the case of a friend of his, M., who, after attempting automatic writing and obtaining it successfully, was unable to leave off the practice when he desired to. Even at night, when retiring to rest, M. had habitually placed paper and pencil by his bedside, in order to be able to write at once when summoned to do so, and he had frequently been awakened from his sleep for this purpose, much to the detriment, of course, of his mental and physical health. After this there had come a still further development of the mystical power of writing. The pencil, too, had been discarded, and M. had begun to trace the writing with his finger in the air. He could thus, it appears, write out a message at some length, and was fully able to read it afterwards, just as though there was a piece of paper suspended in the air. Things had thus gone on for many months, when M. at last awakened to the fact that a great transformation was passing over his moral and intellectual nature, and that some other mind had permeated his entire being, and he was now conscious that he was ceasing to think his own thoughts. In short, there could not be any doubt that fetters were being woven around him, which he was growing daily more incapable of breaking. The condition of servility and submission which the control at first effected was now thrown off, and the latter showed signs of absolute power. No treatment, either hypnotic or medical, had the slightest influence upon the strange phenomenon, and M. had now given up all hope from this quarter. Some of the authorities whom he had consulted did not believe in obsession or possession. Others ascribed it to hysteria and fixed ideas. Help there was none. Dr. Roper goes on. Its dangers. I tried to argue with the personality and prove to him that he was merely a subconscious product on the part of M. When I persisted in denying the presence of a personality other than and different from that of M., a very frenzy seemed to shake the frame of M., and words of the most abusive kind were levelled at me. "What fools you are," it exclaimed, "to tamper with things you do not understand, to facilitate the invasion of spirits and then to deny that they exist, to play with hell fire and then be surprised that it hurts and burns. I challenge you to propose any kind of experiment to test my utter and entire independence of the person of this idiot, with whom I can do absolutely as I please. See how I can handle him and ill-treat him. I am now beating and hurting him, and he can do nothing to defend himself." With this there appeared red spots in different parts of M.'s face, and he groaned as if in physical pain. Upon this I replied that I should accept the notion of an independent intelligence, if it could be shown to be a fact and could be clearly demonstrated. This he promised to do. Many similar cases can be found in this author's works, particularly Modern Spiritualism and The Supreme Problem, and though they are doubtless colored to some extent by the author's religious prejudices, they are nevertheless valuable as records or human documents, and should be studied as much. There are other spiritualists who have written much on this subject of spirit obsession, as for instance Dr. J. M. Peebles, whose work, The Demonism of the Ages, or Spirit Obsessions, should be read by all interested in spiritualism. Many cases are given in this work. How obsessing spirits gain control. Madame Anita Silvani, who is an experienced and cautious medium, makes the following wise statements concerning the possibilities of obsession in those roughly or over hastily developed. As to the evils experienced by some persons who have sat in circles for development or for the manifestation of psychic power, I would say that the whole theory of magnetic control rests upon a condition of mutual receptivity being established between the members of a circle, but few reflect that the blending of magnetisms with those who form the spirit side of that circle is no less a part of the process, and that without the aid of the magnetism of the sitters present, nothing belonging to the spirit side of life would be obtained. Now, in forming a circle, how are you to ensure absolute freedom from the influence of the low or evil, earthbound spirits who crowd the streets of a large city? The magnetic aura created by the circle hangs in a cloud around it and draws spirits toward it. Even as a magnet draws iron and steel and everything bright and rusty, useful tools and dangerous weapons will be attracted by the powerful magnet. Poisoned magnetism. If you once admit that the aura of a pure and good person can, under certain conditions, be poisoned by absorbing the tainted mixture from a mixed circle of all sorts of mortals and spirits, you also admit that the good persons can carry home with them a sufficient portion of that poisoned magnetism to form the nucleus of a magnetic state, congenial to the low and depraved spirits, and into which any of them can enter a second time without the aid of the circle. For this reason we are opposed to mixed or miscellaneous circles, especially when sitters are not sincere and known to one another. We believe that possession is not always evil, and indeed it is often necessary. But it is the continued control of a highly sensitive medium which does the harm by absorbing his finer life essence. An earthbound spirit is like one who belongs to neither earth nor heaven nor Gehenna. He has lost his hold on the earth life, and has not yet attained to the spirit world. He lives in his astral body, and having nothing of his own, must borrow from those both above and below him on the ladder of development. Obsession versus mediumship. Mediumship is necessary. Without it there would be no means of knowledge, no instruments through which to study the psychic plane. But mediumship, in exact proportion to the magnetic powers it confers, becomes a greater and ever greater source of danger the further its development is carried, unless the control of those powers can be handled with a firm hand, and understood in all its aspects. Knowledge is the best safeguard, and knowledge will be best obtained by those who can study all the conditions of psychic development. It is said that there are two forms of magnetism, the astral and the physical. The fundamental difference between them is due to the different conditions under which the astral plane and the physical plane function. How spirits influence us. It must not be thought, however, that all I have said on obsession relates entirely to spiritualism, or to development in circles or in private. We live all the time in a spiritual world as well as in a material one, and hence are open to the possibilities of obsession or influence, both good or bad, and many show in daily life the fact that this influence is strong, for or against. Invisible intelligences are said to be with us much of the time, some urging us on to false and wrong deeds, others helping and encouraging us in actions of kindness, sympathy, and benevolence. It is our duty to get in touch with the latter as much as possible, and then we shall receive inspiration and enlightenment from higher sources than any at present about us. The difficulty is to know how to do this without risk, for as St. Paul said, we must try the spirits, and endeavor to prove to our own satisfaction whether they are good or bad. There are various types of obsession, but for our present purposes we shall omit many of the odd and exceptional phases, such as vampires, which will be discussed later on in this book, and shall speak only of the ordinary type of spiritistic obsession. The magnetic link. The body and mind are doubtless connected by a sort of magnetic link. The mind and the physical body are connected by means of a fluidic or etheric body, in shape the double of the physical body. It is owing to the fact that this body becomes detached from the physical frame at times, that many of the phenomena of obsession and insanity occur. The lines of force are broken, and the etheric body becomes first of all loosened inside the physical body, and then separated more or less altogether from it, without the wish of the subject, who may even be altogether unconscious of the process, and not know what is going on within him. He only experiences the resultant phenomena, and it is for this reason that he does not know what method or course of treatment to pursue in order to get better or become cured. All ordinary treatment is, for this reason, useless. Medical and physiological treatment, for the reason that it acts only on the physical body, not on the mind, and hypnotic or other psychological treatment is almost equally useless, for the reason that it acts on the mind without reaching the physical body. Any form of treatment which really cures must aim to act upon the etheric link or connection between mind and body, and to act upon it in such a way that it will become readjusted both to the mind and body, and this once accomplished, the mind will be restored to its condition of health and sanity. One of the chief things to do, therefore, is to act upon this magnetic link and draw back the etheric body into the physical. We know that anesthetics of all kinds tend to drive out or disconnect the etheric from the physical body, and it is possible that some day in the future science may discover a drug which will have the reverse effect, of driving or drawing back the etheric into the physical body. When this has been discovered, it will doubtless be the means of curing many cases of insanity at present held incurable. For the present, inasmuch as this drug has never been discovered, we must resort to magnetic and mesmeric treatment and other methods of cure, to be enumerated more fully later on in this chapter. Early symptoms of obsession. First of all, let us consider some of the typical symptoms of obsession when they occur. One of the primary things which will be noticed, probably, will be that the patient will be unable to sleep properly. He suffers from insomnia, coupled with restlessness and irritability. Soon after this he begins to experience a dull ache or pain at the base of the brain, sometimes at the base of the spine also. These spots will be tender to the touch. A general debilitated or run down nervous condition will be present, perhaps unnoticed until attention be drawn to the fact. If the subject has been practicing automatic writing, let us say, he will begin to have a more or less persistent desire to write. This will keep pressing him forward and urging him to try what he can get with pencil or planchette. Thoughts seem put into his head, ideas, impressions, and impulses which urge him to perform certain actions or do certain things. These will increase in intensity and frequence. Danger signals. From this point onward, great caution should be used, as the danger point or dividing of the ways has now been reached. A careful student of the occult might point out that the symptoms mentioned above and in the first chapter are alarmingly similar to those in the early stages of some types of insanity. This is true. I described them earlier in this book, be it understood, not as desirable symptoms, but as those which are likely to appear, and for which the student should be on the lookout. The facts should be placed before him, and when he is in possession of the knowledge concerning them, he will know how best to meet them, if he observes such symptoms. We see, therefore, the importance of careful and systematic development in the cultivation of mediumship, as I have so often pointed out before in this book. After the above stage has been reached, it is probable that the student, who is on the wrong road, will hear words as though inside his head, or externally in space, or possibly in his solar plexus, though this is more rare. Or the phenomena may take the visual turn, in which case the patient will see things, mostly of an unpleasant nature, such as snakes, devils, or monstrous or grotesque living objects. Thenceforward unfavorable symptoms will probably develop rapidly until a patient is completely obsessed and under control. The line to be pursued in cases of this character is twofold: first, prevention; second, cure. Prevention of obsession. Prevention. Sound physical health is essential for all wholesome spiritual and mediumistic advancement, and if the patient is sick or ill, and especially if run down or depleted nervously, he should stop all mediumistic practices until he is again restored to health. Plenty of outdoor exercise of as rugged a nature as possible would do wonders in cases of this character. Fresh air, both day and night, is essential. Tea, coffee, and alcohol should be avoided. Plenty of milk should be drunk by the patient, as this both restores and builds up the nervous system in a way that nothing else can. Above all, plenty of sleep must be obtained, and no matter whether the patient desires 10 hours or more at night, this should be allowed, and plenty of rest at all other times. This is very essential at this stage of the proceedings. The mental and spiritual health must be maintained equally with the physical. Your critical judgment and common sense must be exercised now, as always, both in judging the messages received and in the general conduct of life. Do not believe everything which is told you, as there are many lying and deceiving intelligences as well as useful and good ones. Above all, do not act upon or obey messages which do not strongly appeal to your own good sense and worldly judgment. If you keep up your mediumistic practices, sit only a short time each day, not more than 15 or 20 minutes at the longest, and if possible at the same time each day. These two rules, as before pointed out, are very important. Never allow yourself to continue beyond the time limit you have set yourself, no matter how interesting the communications may be, but say in a firm, loud voice, "We must stop now," or "I will sit again at the same time tomorrow for the continuation of the message." You should then discontinue the writing. Important warnings and precautions. Never go inside your own head and examine its processes or introspect for too long a time. The wonders of brain and thought may appeal to your imagination, but never let them influence you or cause you to turn your thoughts inward in the attempt to solve them. If you do, it is sure to end disastrously, and there is no more reason why you should be conscious of your thinking apparatus than of your digestive or circulatory apparatus, which is equally mysterious and wonderful. Let them go on by themselves without thinking anything about them, but using them rather as instruments for your life purposes. Always keep an interest in external things and live, as it were, outside your head, in the outer world all the time. Become interested in matter-of-fact and worldly objects and interests, as this will tend to distract your mind from yourself and restore you to a condition of normal, healthy-mindedness. Cultivate a sense of humor, and never take yourself or your mediumship so seriously that you cannot see the humorous side of a situation when it may arise. Endeavor to harden the inner self, so to say, and focus and concentrate it at a given point which is under your conscious volition and control. Keep the center of consciousness always intact, and be sure that the center is yourself. Do not focus either the sight or the interest on external images or impressions when these become persistent. When this is the case, force yourself to banish them by an effort of will, and by deliberately turning the attention into other more practical directions. Further advice. When dropping to sleep, always keep your mind centered on yourself, and never allow yourself any flights of imagination. And never wonder what is going on, or endeavor to catch yourself falling asleep, as you might with safety do at other times. Value sleep, and look upon it as a kindly friend. Even those who are seriously obsessed are safe when they are asleep. And no matter how terrifying their daily experiences, voices, or visions may be, they very rarely have unpleasant or terrifying dreams. Sleep is the resting time of the soul, and if the spirit is en rapport with itself, as it should be, it will be protected from all external influences during the hours of sleep. Cultivate your own force of will and self-possession. If the emotional nature is too intense, this should by all means be calmed down, especially before going to sleep. A prolonged warm bath will have a very good effect in such cases. One other preventative practice will be found very useful. It is this. Seated in a dark room, concentrate your will upon the outer limits of your aura. That is the auric egg, which was described in the chapter on the aura. By proper concentration and practice you will be enabled to harden or toughen the outer shell, as it were, of this auric egg, rendering it impervious to extraneous psychic or spiritual influences. This you should always practice before dropping off to sleep. Those who have developed this power in a proper and adequate manner are absolutely impervious to any evil or malign influences from without. The cure of obsession. Cure. Supposing now that you have not taken these precautions in time, and that you have become actually obsessed for the time being, or that you meet one who is unfortunate enough to be in that condition. What is to be done? The advice which was given under the last heading should be followed here to some extent. The physical health should be built up by all means in your power. Sleep is absolutely essential, and as much of it must be secured as possible. It may be necessary even to resort to sleeping draughts or powders in order to secure the necessary sleep. These should be prescribed by your regular physician, however. While drugs are doubtless harmful, bromide and similar medicines can be taken with benefit at such a time, since the evil effects of the drug are more than counterbalanced by the benefits derived by mind and spirit. Alcohol must be discontinued at once and a milk diet substituted. You must impress upon the patient, for such he is now, that no one can help him beyond a certain limited point. He must help himself. The cure must come from within rather than from without. How to use the mind. Distract his mind by all possible methods, so as to make it objective instead of introspective. Do not let him go inside his head for a moment to listen to the voices, or to see the visions which float before him, but immediately anything of the kind occurs, distract his attention and interest him in something which is going on about him, and of as dramatic a nature as possible, so as to insure attention. Do not let him go inside his head, for the more he lives within himself, the more difficult will he be to cure. You must teach him to disregard or to deny the voices, or impressions which insistently come to him. If they flatter him and tell him to do certain things, teach him that these voices are evil and lying, and are not to be trusted, for if they were otherwise he would not be in his present condition. Never imagine for a moment that an obsessed person is illogical or is not open to reason. His reasoning faculties are often keenly alert, and have often to be appealed to effect a cure. These mental devices are very important, though they do not, as before said, go to the root of the matter. Diagnosis and treatment. Clairvoyant diagnosis is very valuable, and a trained clairvoyant can sometimes see the obsessing spirits and describe them. When this is the case, the problem of cure becomes more real and more apparent. If the patient believes in the efficacy of prayer, this is doubtless a potent method of cure. The religious nature is one of the most fundamental sides of our character, and is a factor which is capable of exerting an immense pressure when properly brought to bear. Encourage the patient, therefore, to pray, if he is at all of a religious turn of mind. Magnetic treatment, such as passes, etc., is often very valuable and will assist in restoring the patient to health, by acting upon the etheric body direct, as before explained. Combined with suggestion, this is one of the most potent weapons that can be used in our present state of knowledge. By these methods also we can in some cases toughen the outer protective auric shell, if the patient is unable to direct his mind sufficiently to do this himself. By proper striving, however, he will soon place himself in the direction of the great healing cosmic currents, and when once he has done so, will begin to improve immediately and make rapid progress. Spiritual treatment. The most important remedial measure must now be described, inasmuch as the obsessing intelligences are spirits, usually of an evil or lying nature, though they may be only ignorant or bungling, who have wrecked the medium's nervous mechanism, through their ignorance of how to operate it. They are capable of being reached and removed by other spirits. That is, we should approach them not from the physical or even the mental plane, but from the spirit side of life. One of the best ways to do this is to secure the services of a reliable trance or clairvoyant medium, who in the mediumistic condition is capable of discerning the spirits and influencing the patient. An experienced medium of this character has with him certain guides or controls who are helpful and friendly. These guides, if called upon, will assist by arguing with, or, if necessary, forcefully removing the obsessing intelligences who are influencing the psychic. The case should be explained to the medium's guides when the latter is in trance, and their assistance asked. They will then undertake to remove the obsessing spirits, and will often succeed in doing so after a few trials, though in some instances they are unable to persuade or induce the obsessing spirits to leave, and are not powerful enough to enforce their removal. This, however, is the most potent and effectual method which we know at present, and should be employed whenever possible. If a medium of this character is unavailable, then a second person should speak to the obsessing intelligences direct, and reason with them as he would with a human being, pointing out to them the uselessness of the proceeding, the injury they are doing the medium, the harm to themselves, etc. It is rare indeed that such measures, properly applied and coupled with the mental and physical treatment described above, will fail to remove the influences which are at work. The brighter side of the subject. I have described fully and freely the seamy side of spiritualism and its possible dangers. The student must not be discouraged, however, from this black outlook. The dangers exist, truly, but they also exist in other lines of experimental research, and many lives have been lost in attempts to perfect some system of medicine or some antidote for poison which today we use with safety. It is the same here. Properly, carefully, and systematically developed, mediumship should present none of these dangers or difficulties, but should, on the contrary, bring the student into touch with higher planes of thought and activity and enable him to approach the more angelic sphere of being, as by careless or wrong development he will as surely come in contact with spirits of the opposite nature. For this reason I again urge the student to study and practice carefully and cautiously as he proceeds, so that none of these unpleasant or terrifying experiences may at any time come to him. End of Chapter 23. Obsession and Insanity. Recording by Pamela Krantz.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 24. Prayer, Concentration, and Silence. The subjects treated in this chapter will probably be of special value to the student after that immediately preceding it. We have already spoken of the value of prayer in certain cases, and it may be said that both silence and concentration, under certain conditions, will always prove of great value, not only in the cure of obsession, but at all other times when dark clouds loom up on the horizon. In order to secure the best results from these psychological processes, however, they should be practiced according to certain laws, and the reason for their operation should be thoroughly understood by the student. What the silence really signifies. What is called the silence in general New Thought philosophy is a peculiar psychic state into which the student enters in order to secure certain results. As the term implies, quiet or silence are necessary factors, but they are mere means to an end. Silence in itself would achieve nothing. It means that in this condition, thereby induced, certain practices may be followed which produce the desired results. Concentration is the focusing of the entire being at any given moment upon a central point of interest, either inward or outward as the case may be. It may be upon some object, or some inner thought or psychic condition. Concentration upon objects is usually employed as a mere outward exercise, to train the mind to act according to instructions, so to speak, so that when the time comes, it may be employed in useful and helpful psychic activity. The value of concentration. Concentration means power. The more we concentrate on anything, the more certain it is to be accomplished, and the better will the results be. Just as a number of streams meeting at a certain point will create a rushing, mighty current, so in the same manner will scattered psychic activity and forces, if brought to a common point, produce certain powerful results, which may be centered, or turned into one direction or into another. One of the chief practical uses of concentration is the use it may be put to hold or bind the self together. we should never let it be scattered in a variety of separate channels of expression, but rather concentrated into one single powerful unit. Just as the strands of a rope may become separated, so the mind may become disintegrated and lose its initial power. In this weakened condition, it can be acted upon by other minds and forces, just as the single strands of rope can be broken, but the whole rope would resist any strain put upon it. The mind, when concentrated and acting under proper direction and control, is similarly impervious to all outside influences which may not be desired, and at the same time is itself a powerful factor either for good or evil. Concentration exercises. A few simple exercises in concentration may here be given, which will be found useful not only in psychic development, but in every phase of life. 1. Read a page of some heavy technical book, the meaning of which is not at all clear to you. Reread the page with the determination to understand what it means. Read this over a number of times if necessary, never letting your will relax for a moment, but determined to understand the thought of the author. If you do this, you will, after a few readings, the number varying, be enabled to grasp fully what is meant. 2. Place a watch in front of you and look at the second hand until it has completed the circle marking the minute. During this process, never let your thoughts wander from the second hand for a moment. Concentrate upon it fully. You will probably find that your thoughts are wandering, and that you cannot even for the space of a minute fix them absolutely under your control. Practice this until you have succeeded in accomplishing it. 3. Call up before your mind's eye a picture of a certain living friend. Hold this image in front of you as long as possible, making the details in every way as clear as you can, by endeavoring to fill out mentally the color of the hair, of the eyes, the complexion, and any peculiar markings that you can remember. Now, when the face is vivid before your mind's eye, see whether you can discover any peculiarities in the face hitherto unknown to you. If you note anything of the kind, ascertain the next time you see this friend whether or not these impressions are correct. 4. Call up before your mental vision the face of some dead relative or friend. Concentrate upon it, holding it firmly before you in space. Study it closely, filling in all details as before. Finally, when you have held this vividly for a minute or so, without wavering in your attention, open your psychic or mental ears, so to speak, and see if you can receive any message from the person whose face is before you. This will be found a very useful practice, on occasion, at the beginning of your mediumship, and will enable you possibly to receive direct communications when you have tried in every other way and failed. You will not be able to do so, however, until you have mastered fully this faculty of concentration. The dynamic power of the mind. Having progressed so far, you may now concentrate upon certain mental or psychic processes, while willing or demanding that some return be made as a result of your volitional activity. Remember that every thought you send out into the universe attracts to itself others of a like nature, and ultimately returns to the sender with added power, just as a boomerang returns to the thrower. Altruistic thoughts, such as love, justice, forgiveness, etc., will therefore return to the owner and make him happier for having thought them. Evil and malevolent thoughts will, on the contrary, return and make the sender more unhappy and more innately evil in consequence. The path we travel, whether it be upward or downward, always gets easier as we proceed. We are helped along not only by the powers of good or darkness, but by our own thoughts and their results. Thoughts are things. No thought is ever annihilated, and there is evidence to show that thought can take material form on occasion, and influence, either for good or evil, those at a distance. This will be more fully explained, however, in subsequent chapters. The value of prayer. We must now say a few words on prayer, and its great value to one who sends out the prayer thought. There are many who believe that prayer is superstition, since they do not believe in a personal God who grants or answers prayers, but rather in an impersonal creative power which orders all things according to unvarying laws. Even on this theory, however, prayer, under certain conditions, is fully justified, for in the first place, as we have just seen, helpful and wholesome thoughts tend to bring their own reward. In the next place, prayer is an autosuggestion of great value, and its influence upon the mental and physical life is frequently very great. In the third place, prayer will help and buoy you up by giving you added confidence and belief in your powers. In the fourth place, inasmuch as telepathy is a fact in nature, you may, while in that condition, reach the minds of other human beings, who can help you and will actually do so without knowing why. The many interesting cases which may be found of answers to prayers, bringing a material return, fully justify its use from that point of view. Fifth, you can doubtless reach by telepathy friends in the spirit life, who may be brought into more or less direct touch with you, during the prayerful condition of mind, which is certainly closely akin to certain phases of subjective mediumship. They may, in this manner, be made aware of your condition for the first time, and will then endeavor to help you. Sixth, by prayer you may bring yourself into harmony with the great cosmic currents of good, which, as before explained, are playing hither and thither upon our universe in much the same way as light, heat, gravitation, electricity, and other material forces play or act upon it and us. All these material factors must be taken into account, apart from the possibility that there is a receptive, loving, and protecting power in the world, which is capable of helping us in time of need. Prayer in obsession. In obsession cases particularly, prayer is of value, because of the relief from tension and the wholesome mental attitude induced. Just as a drowning man will clutch at a straw, so those who are in terrible distress will frequently resort to this practice, when they would not think of doing so at any other time, and in a sense they are justified in so doing. There is an old saying that man's extremity is God's opportunity. It may be that prayer, in the ordinary sense of the word, is not needed during an ordinary, healthy life, provided that it is lived in accordance with the laws of nature and according to its own highest mental and spiritual insight. At the same time, there may be occasions when it is justified and helpful, and certainly it is proved so in certain cases of difficulty and obsession. How prayer cures. The beneficial effects of prayer may be explained in many cases quite simply. As explained in the chapter devoted to the subconscious mind, certain groups of thoughts tend to become bound together, forming what is known as a complex. If this activity be wholesome, the result is beneficial, and in fact, all our educational processes depend upon this complex formation. On the other hand, these groups of thoughts may be harmful, in which case they tend to press upon the mind from beneath, in much the same way that physical tumors might press upon some healthy structure in the body, and impede its functional activity. The mind, therefore, becomes diseased by reason of this pressure, and will only resume its wholesome attitude when this pressure is removed. By means of hypnotic suggestion and spiritual treatment, the mind may be opened up and explored, and this complex found and removed. This once done, the mind is restored to its wholesome activity, and the cure is complete. This is known in technical language as the purging treatment. As soon as the unwholesome load is removed, the mind is cured. Now, in prayer, when a full and free confession is made, this same purging process occurs. The mind is freed from its burden, and is consequently restored to health by its own inner nature. This being so, it may be seen that prayer as such is a real curative process, and in many types of obsession and similar cases, it may be employed effectually, as before said, as a therapeutic measure of great value in curing the sick mind. End of chapter 24.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Libby Gone. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 25. The Human Fluid. The human body is charged with a certain magnetism which differs from all other forms of magnetism and electricity in the world. All other forces of which we have knowledge are non-intelligent, and have to be guided and directed by mind or by some law, in order to bring about any definite or desired result. It is therefore meaningless to explain the continued and consecutive movements of the planchette board or any similar instrument by saying it is due to magnetism, or to electricity, or to any similar power. These are all blind forces, and must be directed, in order that any intelligent result may be obtained. The vital magnetism, which is present in the body, is also a blind force, but it is under the control of the subconscious mind, and under certain conditions, to be spoken of later, may be played upon or manipulated by external intelligences. In this way the various results are obtained. Nature and properties of the fluid. This vital magnetism appears to be fluidic or semi-fluidic in form, and capable of flowing from one organism into another. It is upon this principle that various magnetic cures are based, the fluid running from the operator's fingers into the body of the patient treated. That this fluidic energy is present in any human body may be proven in a number of ways. In the first place, the human aura, which I described in an earlier chapter, is partly a manifestation of this vital activity, the colours being the varying vibratory counterparts of the energy radiated. In psychometry, again, it is this vital energy which passes into objects, impregnating them with its fluidic properties. Each individual has his own peculiarly constituted and personal vital magnetism, and this differs from all others in quality and properties. A fully developed psychic is enabled to distinguish these, one from another, and a medium in a trance may be enabled to get into communication with a deceased person, through or by means of this fluidic impression left upon it, as explained in the chapter devoted to trance. One or two practical examples or exercises may serve to show the student the reality of this fluidic emanation, and how he may employ these to convince his skeptical friends also of its reality. Experiment to prove the existence of the fluid. 1. A very simple test is the following. Hang a dead black cloth over the back of a chair, and see that no light falls directly on the cloth. The light in the room should be somewhat subdued, and you should stand between it and the cloth, so as to throw your hands, held against the latter, into shadow. Now approach your two hands one to the other, and touch the fingertips together, the hands being otherwise opened wide, palms turned toward yourself, and thumbs pointing toward the ceiling. In this condition you will probably find that as the first and fourth fingertips touch, the second and third have to be bent considerably to touch one another. The hands should be at a distance of about 3 inches from the black cloth, and about 15 inches from your face. Hold the fingertips together for about 30 seconds, then very gradually pull them apart, and you will see, coming from and joining your fingers, streams of whitish misty vapour, which is the fluid connection between the hands, which you have established by the previous contact. If you move the fingers slightly up and down after they have been separated an inch or so, you will find that the stream or bands of light followed the fingers, still connecting them, which will prove that this is not due to a hallucination or to what is called persistence of vision. How to magnetize water. 2. Place 2 glasses of water side by side on the table. Over one of these place the tips of your fingers, held together so as to form a point as much as possible. Hold these over the water in one glass for 4 or 5 minutes, willing that your vital magnetism should pass into the water and affect it. If now you ask a sensitive person who has not seen you perform the experiment to pick out the glass of water which has been treated magnetically, he will be able to do so almost invariably, and will tell you that the water sparkles as though charged with some effervescent gas. Life preserved by the human fluid. Some recent experiments conducted by a group of scientific men in Bordeaux, France, have proved conclusively that the human body radiates a form of vital energy, which may be extremely powerful in its results. A lady possessing the power of projection or externalizing this vital energy in a remarkable degree, discovered that by placing her hands for 15 or 20 minutes daily for a period of 2 or 3 weeks over certain dead objects such as oysters, canary birds, fishes, and even larger animals such as guinea pigs and rabbits, she was enabled to preserve them indefinitely, that is, instead of decomposing as they ordinarily would have done, they dried up or mummified, and were preserved for months with no changes whatever taking place in their substance. They never decomposed. Proofs of the human fluid. This fact was fully endorsed by several chemists and physicians who studied her case, and they stated that this was due to the fact that the vital emanation coming from her body killed or destroyed the bacteria usually present in all these bodies after death. This could be traced with the microscope. For example, 6 oysters were allowed to decompose partially, while 6 were treated by her. The 6 that were treated never decomposed at all, but dried up or desiccated without any putrefaction. Now, when the other half dozen oysters had partially decomposed, and bacteria could be seen under the microscope, Madame X was requested to place her hands over the oysters and treat them. After 15 minutes' treatment, they were again examined and found that thousands of bacteria had been killed. At the end of a few days they had all disappeared, and the oysters dried up, and thenceforward no decomposition whatever was noted. This is a very striking proof of the reality of the human fluid and its peculiar action in certain cases. There is evidence to show, however, that in other instances its action is different from this, and that it imparts life and energy rather than proves destructive, as in the above unique case. Many persons have the power of preserving the life of flowers by treating them with their hands in a similar manner every day, and the student might well try this experiment and to see what extent he can preserve the life of certain flowers. Others of a like nature being preserved at the same time by another person and under similar conditions to note the difference, if any, between the two sets. It is this vital magnetism which, projected beyond the bodily limits under the action of the will, is responsible for many physical phenomena, as we shall see in Chapter 38. How material objects become charged by the fluid. Material objects, particularly of a sponge-like nature, such as wood, are capable of being charged up very highly by this vital magnetism, and when this is the case they become en rapport with the medium, who is enabled to move or manipulate them from a distance by his power of will, because of this vital fluidic connection. We shall speak more fully of this, however, in the chapter devoted to physical phenomena. It may be proved experimentally also that this fluidic magnetism is either capable of sensing pain, or is the means whereby pain is carried from the nerve centres to the consciousness. Exteriorization of sensibility. Under certain conditions the fluidic body, which is the inner part of the physical body and acts as its double, may be hypnotic, and magnetic processes can be removed entirely from the physical body, in which case it may be set upon by the suggestion from others present at the time. For example, Colonel Albert de Rochas of Paris succeeded in entirely disengaging or separating the fluidic body of his subject from the physical body, and gradually removed it to greater and greater distances until it stood several feet from the entranced subject's physical organism. He then pricked the surface of the fluidic body with needles, and the sleeping subject experienced these sensations of pain in her own physical body at the spot or point exactly corresponding to the point picked on the etheric body. Repercussion. This seems to show that there is a direct vital or magnetic link between the etheric and the physical organisms, and that injury done to the one reacts upon the other by means of what is known as repercussion. This is a very significant fact when we remember that in materializing seances it sometimes happens that the figure is seized or in some way injured by the sitter, and that the entranced medium is injured in exactly the same way that the materialized figure is injured. This fact has long been known to experienced spiritualists. This curious fact also has great significance, and throws an interesting sidelight on many of the phenomena of so-called witchcraft. We know that many of these stories relate that the witch, assuming another form, visited other scenes or localities, and if cut, shot, or injured there, she herself was found the next day to have these exact injuries, though lying in her bed at some distance from the scene of the event in question. Such stories certainly appear more credible when we take into consideration the above facts, for both sets of phenomena seem to depend upon repercussion. How the human fluid may impress photographic plates. The human fluid may also be proved to exist by means of photography. If a sensitive plate be wrapped in black paper, and the hands of the psychic or medium of suitable temperament be placed upon it, the fluidic radiation coming from the hands and fingers will influence the plate through the enveloping black paper, and the impress of the hands will be found upon the plate. This can only be accounted for by supposing that the fingers became in some way radioactive during the experiment. Many psychics can go further than this, and can impress upon the plate an image or figure of their thought at the time. Thus, when holding the plate between their palms, or on their forehead, or against the solar plexus, and thinking of a sheep, a cat, a chair, etc., the image of a sheep, cat, or chair is impressed upon the plate. Experiments such as these may be tried by any student, and are of extreme interest and also of value scientifically when they are successful. It is to be hoped that many readers of this book will try experiments of this character and report any results they may obtain. End of chapter 25.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 26. Self-Projection. By self-projection is meant the faculty or ability to send out or cause to travel to a distance the etheric self or double by an effort of will. This seems to be to some extent inherent in some individuals and occurs with them spontaneously and almost against their will. They go into trance and at the end of a certain time find that they have left their bodies and travel to some distant scene. This, however, is rare. In the majority of the cases, the power has to be developed by long and assiduous cultivation. Of what the thought body is composed. Before I come to speak of this projection of the self, a few words are necessary as to the nature and composition of this etheric body, or double, which is thus projected. The physical body is composed of millions of tiny cells, and in each cell there is a center or nucleus of energy. This center is so infinitely small that it cannot be detected even by the highest powered microscope. All that we know is that physical matter in the cell is in some way vitalized or rendered living when it comes in contact with this vital center. The source of the energy is invisible and cannot be determined by us. It seems to well up from nowhere. Now, this center of energy constitutes a sort of psychic point or cell of its own, and as there are millions of them in the body, corresponding to the number of physical cells, it is obvious that there are millions of vital cells which conform exactly to the shape of the body, since they correspond to its physical cells in life. These psychic centers have been called psychomeres, and their bulk is estimated at about 1/1,000,000th that of the physical body. The density of etheric double therefore would be about 1/1,000,000th as dense as the physical body. The combined weight of these psychomeres has been variously estimated, but probably varies between that of the 10 postage stamps and 1 ounce. This would represent the weight of the astral or etheric body, and is such that it would float slowly upward through the physical atmosphere as would a balloon. This fact coincides with what we know of the gradual floating upward of the spiritual body after death. Inner finer bodies. It is this body which we inhabit after we discard the denser physical frame. It is not necessary to suppose that our consciousness is scattered throughout the whole of this body any more than it is at present. The center of spiritual activity and the power of the will and mind may be a point of force, so to speak, within this etheric double, and we may utilize and animate it just as we utilize and animate the physical body in this life. After a time it is probable that we discard this etheric body, to assume one of even lesser density, and that this process continues a number of times until the spirit ultimately inhabits one of such infinitely fine matter, if such it can be called, that it is practically a mental or spiritual body. This is what we learn from many spirits who have communicated such facts to us. It is this body, therefore, which becomes disengaged from the physical body during life and goes on trips or excursions, carrying with it the consciousness of the individual, and returns to animate the physical body at the end of a certain period of time. Possible dangers and how they are overcome. When this disunion or severance takes place, there is always a connecting link, a magnetic cord, which unites the physical and the etheric bodies. If this cord were to get broken for any reason, reanimation would be impossible, and the death of the body would take place. This is the great danger attendant upon experiments of this character, but such a phenomena is only possible in cases of very deep trance, where the separation is almost complete, and very little serves to disconnect it entirely. It is highly improbable that any but the most advanced student could reach this stage, and when he has reached it, certain mystical inner practices may be resorted to, which would offset this possible danger. It is this body which is occasionally photographed, and many so-called spirit photographs are in reality photographs, not of discarnate but of incarnate spirits. That is, they are wandering doubles of spirits still in the flesh. Again, many apparitions and figures seen in haunted houses are of this nature. They constitute the projections of living persons rather than those who have passed over, and it takes an experienced psychic student to distinguish between the two types of figures. They have been known to appear at seances, also in the form of materializations. In addition to these etheric bodies or doubles, there may also be mental or thought bodies, created entirely by the mind and the will of the subject. Thus, in a case known to us, a clairvoyant was sent on a trip to the house of a friend and asked to describe the individual whom she found there. She described a certain person in detail, hair, eyes, features, etc., given at great length. When the psychic had finished and recovered full consciousness, she was told that her description was entirely wrong, and that no such person existed in the house in question, and her description was throughout erroneous. In order to prove this, a journey was made at once to the house of the subject in question. When the facts were stated, he replied that although he himself did not in any way resemble the clairvoyant description, this corresponded exactly and in 1 minute detail to a character he was creating and writing about in his book. In other words, his thoughts had created the figure so vividly that it actually lived for the time being as an objective entity, and was seen as such by the entranced clairvoyant. We can see from this, then, that thoughts are things. They assume shape, and, in a certain sense, live in the physical world. All our thoughts have a definite shape as well as a definite color, and the more advanced students along the path of development can see and describe these thoughts, we are told, as clearly as we see objects. How the selves may be projected. If this may be true, it has a very significant bearing upon cases which occur and have been reported in the past. For example, the reader will doubtless recall the case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, a most important case for all students to study. Here, as we know, the original individual finally became two. Dr. Jekyll developed another self, calling himself Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll was kindly, helpful, and sympathetic. Hyde was evil, malicious, and wholly repulsive. These two selves were developed in the original person, and the split between them became greater and greater as the months went by. Finally, Mr. Hyde assumed complete supremacy, and Dr. Jekyll vanished forever. In this case, it was not a mere change of personality which could be accounted for on any psychological grounds. It was an actual physical transformation. Apparently, there were two separate bodies, which were transformed one into the other. Suppose now that the good self, Dr. Jekyll, also the bad self, Mr. Hyde, existing as separate mental beings. Each had the power of self-projection. They would each create by their own thoughts a separate body, and this being would resemble in outward appearance the thoughts which created it. Cases of this character might, therefore, exist and might conceivably be explained on scientific principles. We must be careful, then, of the character of the thought self which we build up. For if this resembles outwardly its inner structure, we may, many of us, come to resemble monstrosities rather than human beings, at some stage of our development when the plane is reached where thoughts predominate and shape the expression of the self. This idea has been graphically portrayed in John Uri Lloyd's book, Etudorfer. This inner etheric body, which is expelled to a distance by the power of will, in cases of self-projection, may be released and projected by the student after a certain amount of practice. He should go about this cautiously, feeling his way as if it were but proceeding more or less along the following lines. Place yourself in a perfectly composed attitude, either on a couch or in a large chair. Close the eyes and breathe deeply for a few minutes, all the time holding the mind on a central point of concentration. Travel over your body in thought, and at each point or spot dwelt upon by you, will that your etheric body becomes detached or loosened from its connection with the physical body. As you begin to gain control of this process, you may hear or rather sense a process of separation taking place, resembling a click and inwardly feeling like the disconnection of an electric current. When this has been completed at one point, travel to another. Do not try too many on any one occasion, and always be sure to restore by an effort of will the original connected condition before you terminate the experiment. Further directions and advice. After you have gone round your body in this way, and have succeeded in disconnecting it more or less completely, you should then call up before you in space a certain distant locality, such as the room of a friend, and throwing the whole force of your being into a single determined effort of will, force yourself mentally to leave your body and travel to the locality before you. If you feel that you are losing consciousness, or that everything is going black before you, discontinue the experiment at once and return to your physical body. If you can keep your self-consciousness active, you may safely travel to any distance, feeling assured that you will be able to return whenever you want to and reanimate your own physical frame. All this, of course, takes time and persistence of development and cannot be acquired in a few days. Moreover, I would advise the student not to attempt this process until he was progressed further in his studies and read the advice contained in the last chapter. Should he, however, make up his mind to do so, he should proceed along the above lines, advancing cautiously all the time and never allowing himself to lose consciousness at any stage of the proceedings. When he has acquired this power, he will have in his possession a wonderful knowledge and a means of acquiring information and spiritual insight which others who have not developed it are totally unable to comprehend. End of chapter 26.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nissa Schmidt. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 27. Apparitions. An apparition is a phantasmal being, commonly called a ghost, which is seen by sensitive individuals under certain conditions. Before we can speak more fully of apparitions, we must answer the question which naturally occurs, namely, what is a ghost? Modern theories and ideas on this question have changed greatly within the past quarter of a century. At that time, if an ordinary scientific man were questioned on this subject, he would probably reply that it was a hallucination, the result of a diseased mind, and had no existence in reality outside the imagination of the subject who perceived it. But in these days this idea has been greatly modified, and it must now be admitted that ghosts are very much more complicated than this. In the first place, when the Society for Psychical Research began its investigations in 1882, it was found that a large percentage of cases of apparitions occurred at or about the time of death. Some occurred before and some after, but most of them were approximately at that time. Further, the subjects who perceived or saw them were not diseased or imaginative persons, and probably never had another experience of this character either before or afterwards. The questions naturally arose: why this connection? What is the bond uniting the dying person with the apparition seen? Some scientific men, it is true, have come forward and stated that this connection is due to chance, and that there was no real connection whatever. This is, however, disproved by the report of the Society, as the result of several years' work. They succeeded in obtaining answers from some 30,000 persons, and calculating the percentage of possible coincidences, they found the number of coincidences was hundreds of times more numerous than chance could account for. Professor Sidgwick's committee, who conducted the investigation, therefore signed the following statement: Apparitions coinciding with death. Between deaths and apparitions of the dying person a connection exists which is not due to chance alone. This we hold as a proved fact. There is, therefore, some definite connection between the two, and the task was to ascertain its nature and character. The theory was then advanced that, inasmuch as telepathy is a fact scientifically proved, and inasmuch as figures and images may be transferred from one mind to another by this means, the dying person might transfer a vision or image of himself to the mind of some friend or relative, so that this person would see, not a real outstanding figure, but a mental picture or image of him, created by the thought of the dying person and conveyed telepathically to the mind of the living friend. These telepathic hallucinations, as they are called, doubtless account for many of the apparitions which are seen at or about the moment of death; also for many of those which occur before death and during the lifetime of the individual. But how about those which occur after death? Here we should have to assume that some other process was involved, or else extend our belief so as to cover and embrace the action of discarnate spirits. Phantasms of the dead. One theory of these apparitions, seen after the death of the person they represent, is that they embody the thought of the dead person. For example, an individual spirit may continue to think over its life and the scenes of its varied activities, and these recollections and thoughts influencing the minds of those still living by means of telepathy would cause them to see the phantasmal image of the person thinking the thoughts. This, however, is a question which we shall discuss more fully in the next chapter. For the present, it may be said that this is one theory advanced to explain so-called phantasms of the dead, or ghosts, as opposed to phantasms of the living and phantasms of the dying. Ghosts that touch. There are many cases of apparitions, however, which cannot be thus easily explained by assuming that they are the projection or telepathic influence of a living mind or the mind of a discarnate spirit. In many cases they seem to be real substantial beings, to occupy space and exist as real semi-solid or material phantoms. Those who have been convinced of the reality of an etheric or spiritual body need have no difficulty in assuming that it is this body which is seen at such times, and in many cases we find strong evidence for supposing that a body of this character actually exists. For example, in one historic instance, a doctor and his wife both saw the figure of a woman standing at the foot of their bed, and saw it cross the room and place its fingers over a small nightlight which was burning on the mantelpiece. At the moment the phantom thus placed his hands over the light, it was extinguished, and the room was left in darkness. Here it is difficult to suppose that any thought creation or telepathic hallucination of any character existed, for the reason that a physical phenomenon was produced, and no hallucination could have done this. Materialized phantoms. Again, in many cases, the phantasmal form or apparition is seen to open doors, lift curtains, raise bedclothes, etc. And in such cases, again, we must assume that a real phantom exists. The problem is thus more complicated than at first appears, and as Mr. Andrew Lang remarked, consequently, if these stories are true, some apparitions are ghosts, real objective entities filling space. Hallucinations cannot draw curtains, or open doors, or cause thumps. Not real thumps. Hallucinatory thumps are different. Dr. Burns tells of a gentleman who, in a dream, pushed against a door in a distant house, so that those in the room were scarcely able to resist the pressure. Now, if this rather staggering anecdote be true, the spirit of a living man, being able to affect matter, is also, so to speak, material, and is an actual entity, an astral body. These arguments then make in favor of the old-fashioned theory of ghosts and wraiths, as things objectively existing, rather than the view that all these "ghosts" are necessarily subjective in origin. Phantasms created by thought. These phantasms are doubtless thought bodies, in many cases constructed by the operating intelligence itself. One interesting fact in this connection is this, that it is nearly always stated by those who have seen figures of this kind that the phantom is clear and plainly visible about the head and the upper part of the body, but that the apparition dwindles down to a vaporous film toward the feet. In other words, the upper part of the body is much clearer than the lower part. If the phantom were a definite thought creation, this is only what we should expect, for we think of the upper portion of our bodies much more than the lower portion. We are more conscious of our head and shoulders, and the upper portion of the trunk, and the hands and arms, and only vaguely conscious of the legs and lower portions of the body. This is exactly what we find in apparitions, and it would therefore seem that the figures are clear in outline just to the extent that the operating intelligence is intensely conscious of the appearance of the body he is creating or building up. Phantoms which impart information. There are also certain cases on record in which the phantom has given the recipient of the experience some important information which he did not know previously, where certain papers are hidden, etc. Such cases certainly prove that an independent intelligence is there, a spirit which is thus manifesting its presence. It must be admitted, however, that most apparitions are purposeless and meaningless, but this is easily accounted for by supposing that we see, at such times, not the spirit itself, but its mere projected thought, a phantom created by the spirit, rather than the spirit itself. Most apparitions are, doubtless, of this nature. We have seen that there are apparitions of the living, of the dying, and of the dead, mostly attached to human beings. When they are attached to localities, they become local phantoms or cases of haunting, of which we shall speak in the next chapter. Experimental apparitions. In addition to these, there are so-called cases of experimental apparitions, in which an individual succeeds in creating a phantasmal figure at a distance by an effort of will or thought. These closely resemble certain cases of self-projection on the one hand, and cases of witchcraft on the other, and form an intermediary between them, since on the one hand they are mere mental pictures, and on the other they are real physical entities. Experimental apparitions, then, seem to bridge the gulf between these two types of phenomena, and form a connecting link. Apparitions may be induced experimentally by willing very strongly, just as you are falling asleep, that you will appear to a certain person at a certain time, and, if this is properly managed, it will be successful in a large number of cases. This may also be induced experimentally by means of hypnotic suggestion, or magnetic or mesmeric processes, and when in the trance, the spirit of the sleeper may be directed to a certain locality and there seen by those present. The natives of West Africa claim to be able to do this more or less at will. They can project the double or etheric body, and, so to speak, materialize at the other end. How to create thought forms. The same laws which prevail in many of the previous exercises also rule here. The student should see to it that he retains a grasp of his own personality and does not lose control of his inner self at any stage of the proceedings. As he progresses in his development along these lines, he should endeavor to make the apparition which appears at the other end of the line, so to speak, more or less solid. After he has once succeeded in the process of projection, he should throw all his will into the effort to make the projected form more and more substantial, and to will that his self-consciousness and activity be actually transferred to the distant scene. In this way he is not only seen by others, who may happen to be present, but is also enabled to see for himself what is actually going on in that place, and obtains at the same time a clairvoyant vision of the surroundings in which he has appeared. In this way, both the psychic and those who perceive the created figure mutually exchange experiences, and this process should be continued until the projected double becomes so solid in structure that it cannot be distinguished from a real physical being. There are many advanced psychic students who claim that they can actually create and project to great distances material bodies of this nature. End of chapter 27.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Amanda Friday. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 28. Haunted Houses. As explained in the last chapter, when apparitions become fixed or attached to one locality, they constitute what is called a local haunting, and the place they influence is commonly called a haunted house. This is the ordinary or common theory of haunted houses, and the average person probably assumes that the figures seen in such houses are material, and the picture he forms of the ghost is that it is a sheeted figure walking about, up and down stairs, and clanking chains after it. There are probably a few, if any, psychic students who believe that houses are haunted by figures of this description, and opposed to this view is that of ordinary science, which contends that there are no haunted houses at all, the figures seen within them being merely the product of expectancy, suggestion, and excited imagination. The explanation of haunted houses. All those who have carefully investigated the subject, however, come to the conclusion, sooner or later, that there are genuine haunted houses, the question is, what constitutes the haunting, and how are such cases to be explained? Many psychic students have specialized, so to speak, in this subject of haunted houses, and have formulated various theories to explain cases of this character. The following are the most important theories which have been advanced: 1. That one person, or group of persons, forming a family, have experienced certain psychic phenomena in the house in question, and these form the nucleus round which gathered impressions, noises, and psychic experiences of all kinds. From a small beginning great results sprang, elaborated by their own minds. Now when these people moved away from the house in question, and other tenants occupied it, this second group was influenced by the thoughts, emotions, and impressions of those who had moved away, so that they in their turn began to see signs and hear strange sounds. Inquiry revealing the fact that the house had the reputation of being "haunted," and their own imaginations would magnify the significance of all they had seen or heard. In other words, this theory contends that telepathy, or influence from living minds, is the all sufficient explanation and alone serves to account for the facts. Telepathy and Psychic Atmosphere. 2. The second theory advanced is that telepathy from the dead is the true explanation, the phantoms seen, etc., being produced by the influence of minds of deceased persons. On this theory the figures and phantoms are not objective or real, any more than in the first case, but are telepathic hallucinations, just as truly, though they have an objective basis of reality, inasmuch as they have originated in the mind of a deceased person. Dreams or thoughts of the dead constitute, therefore, the basic principle of explanation on this theory. 3. The next theory which is advanced is that some subtle psychic atmosphere permeates the walls of the house in question, and that this atmosphere influences or impresses all those who live within it. There is much to say in favor of such a theory, and the previous chapters on the aura, psychometry, the human fluid, etc., will lend a certain amount of support to it. At the same time it is difficult to see how a general and impersonal atmosphere of this character could translate itself into definite figures or forms, particularly when these speak and convey information unknown to the seer. I shall say more of this later. Astral bodies and thought forms. 4. The fourth theory to be advanced is that the figures seen are the astral or etheric bodies of spirits who return, and constitute the haunting, being present in actual fact. This is the nearest approach to the commonly held theory of the figures seen in haunted houses. 5. The fifth theory is that such figures are thought forms, created by some distant, living or disincarnate mind, and projected into the house in question, where they assume more or less definite and tangible form. This is, in a sense, a process of self-projection, but the phantasm is always seen in a certain place, as though magnetically drawn to that locality. The nature of the figures seen. Which of these theories is the correct one? In my own estimation there is much truth in all of them, and no two cases of haunted houses are due to the same cause or depend upon the same conditions. All 5 of these causes may be operating at the same time in any one house, or any 2, 3, or 4 of them may be. Indeed, to judge from the complex nature of the phenomena seen, it is highly probable that such is the case. There is strong evidence, in fact, to make us believe that the ordinary hallucination theories will not serve to explain the facts. For example, these phantasms often produce physical phenomena, as before explained, such as opening doors, lifting curtains, snuffing candles, etc. Mental images or pictures could not do this. Again, animals often see, or appear to see, apparitions in haunted houses, and show all the signs of fear, such as trembling, sweating, etc. In the third place, figures are often described differently by different individuals. For example, A would describe a full face view of the figure, while B would describe the figure in profile. If a real figure were standing where both percipients saw it, this description would be correct. Such cases certainly tend to suggest that a real figure, and no mere hallucination, was present. In the fourth place, apparitions have been seen by 2, 3, or more persons at once. These collective hallucinations, as they are called, strongly suggest an external phantom and no mere mental picture. Proofs of reality. In the fifth place, apparitions which have appeared to strangers occupying haunted houses have afterwards been identified on being shown the photograph of the person. For example, a gentleman sleeping in a house, reputed to be haunted, sees a certain figure bending over him when he awakes at midnight. He notes details of dress, feature, etc., and also notes that he has never seen this person before in his life. The next day he is shown 20 photographs. From among the 20 he selects one as being the phantom seen in the house. The owner of the house then tells him that this is the person said to haunt the locality in question. Again we are driven to believe that more than mere hallucination is at work. In the sixth place, these figures, seen in haunted houses, have occasionally been photographed, and this objective and physical proof of their reality is strong evidence that they are more than mental products. Seventh, figures seen in haunted houses often convey, to the seer, definite information or give messages which the individual in question could not have known. This strongly indicates not only the reality of the apparition, but the fact that it is a disincarnate spirit. For these reasons, therefore, we must assume that haunted houses are actual realities, and that the figures seen therein are, at times at least, outstanding entities and represent more or less directly the individual they appear to portray. Seances in haunted houses. Psychic students can test their power and at the same time conduct many interesting and valuable experiments in haunted houses. In an atmosphere of this sort, which is more highly charged with magnetism than the ordinary seance room, psychic powers of any character should be quickly augmented and increased, so that messages could be obtained by speech, vision, automatic writing, crystal vision, etc. Whenever you hear of a case of a haunted house, therefore, you should make it a point to visit this house at once. It is not necessary to sleep in it a night, as many suppose, in order to test its character. Hold a seance in that house in the evening, and striking phenomena will probably result. Or, if you cannot gather together a group of interested students, sit by yourself and see whether you cannot obtain direct messages from the intelligences present. Experiments in automatic writing, crystal gazing, etc., may also be tried. Clairvoyant diagnosis of haunted houses. Clairvoyants may also render useful service by visiting clairvoyantly haunted houses and ascertaining and describing, if possible, the source and cause of the haunting. Visit the house by means of a clairvoyant excursion, either spontaneously or when in a mesmeric trance, etc., and use your psychic powers to the utmost to discover what you can regarding this house. When you find yourself inside it, look about and see whether you can sense any spirits, evil or otherwise, lurking among its atmosphere. Endeavor to sense the psychic atmosphere of the house and test the aura of those living within it. All houses, reputed to be haunted, may not necessarily be so, but the individuals themselves may be unbalanced or obsessed for some reason, in which case the house itself would be free, except from those influences which were drawn to it by the individuals residing there. Many persons, living in haunted houses, wish to be free from the depressing influences which sometimes hang about houses of this character, yet do not know how to proceed in order to rid themselves of these haunting presences. This is a very complicated question, and one to which psychic students have in the past given far too little attention. In my book, The Coming Science, there is a chapter entitled Haunted Houses and Their Cure, and I would refer all those interested to the work in question. An interesting case is there given of a haunted house which was cured, so to say, by the following means. How to Cure Haunted Houses. A trance medium, Georgia Gladys Cooley, was called in to investigate and do what she could, and when in the house went spontaneously into trance. In that condition her guides spoke through her, and described the haunting spirits. They were then charged to remove them, if possible, and undertook to do so. This they did in a somewhat striking and dramatic manner, and ended by reporting the fact that the haunting presences had been finally completely removed. This is a very instructive case, and shows us that trance mediums and their guides can be of a very great service, in many cases, where the haunting assumes an unpleasant or evil character. Thus the nature of the haunting may be diagnosed clairvoyantly, and the cure effected through some trance medium, and by the spirits who operate through him. In some cases, however, the haunting may be cured by more simple means, such as suggestion, lessening the psychic sensitiveness of those living in the house, by diverting the thoughts, by plenty of outdoor, physical exercise, toughening the aura, etc. On the other hand, there are cases on record where haunted houses have withstood all attempts to cure them, and the inhabitants have ultimately been forced to move. Happily, cases of this character are rare. At all events, haunted houses present a fascinating and useful field, in which the psychic student can test his clairvoyance, or other psychic power, to advantage. End of Chapter 28. Recording by Amanda Friday.
Of your psychic powers and how to develop them. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. Your Psychic Powers and How to Develop Them by Hereward Carrington. Chapter 29. The Difficulties of Communication. The process of communication is doubtless far more difficult and complicated than the average person believes, and is even more complicated than most spiritualists believe. As stated in a previous chapter, one of the great objections to the reality of spiritualism urged in the past is that, if true, many more persons must communicate than now appear to do so, and that of the thousands who die, more must come back than the few who return through mediums. It was there pointed out that the reason for this consists partly in the fact that, quote, good communicators, unquote, are comparatively rare, and that there is necessarily a peculiar psychical condition which enables them to communicate through mediums. In addition to this, a medium must be present at the time that an effort to communicate is being made, and in many cases the recipient of the message must also be reaching out to receive it before it can be given satisfactorily. In other words, the sender and the receiver of the message must stretch out their, quote, mental arms, unquote, so to say, at the same moment before they can shake hands across the great gulf, and if only one does so, he fails to reach the one on the other side. Factors affecting communication. It has frequently been pointed out by scientific investigators of spiritualism that only after the reality of the facts has been proved does their detailed study begin. For example, supposing that a spirit can write through an entranced medium, she giving the messages in automatic writing. The fact once admitted, the scientific study of the case will only have begun, and such questions as these would then have to be answered. To what extent is the medium's spirit disconnected from the body while the communication is taking place? What is the degree of mental activity of the medium's spirit during the communication? Does the communicating intelligence act directly on the brain and nervous centers of the medium, or in a more roundabout manner? And if the former, upon what brain centers does the intelligence act, and how? If a communicator was in life a good visualizer, or had a good memory, etc., would these factors assist him in the process of communication, and if so, how? These and many similar questions would have to be answered, and it is upon questions such as these that many psychical researchers have bent their energies for some time past. It is probable that several hundred years will have to elapse before these questions can be answered fully and the facts explained in detail. Difficulties of the communicating spirit. Let us enumerate some of the difficulties which a communicating spirit probably has to contend with in sending messages through mediums to the living. There is much evidence to show that the process of communication is a very difficult one, for as soon as a spirit gets in contact with the medium and begins to transmit messages, he becomes more or less exhausted and suffocated, so to speak, by the dense aura or atmosphere with which he is called upon to come into contact. In many instances, we read that spirits have to go away several times during the course of a séance, to revive themselves and afterwards return, refreshed and clear-brained, to continue the communications. They experience great difficulty in holding their thoughts together connectedly during the process of communication. This does not mean that they are ordinarily in this confused state, but very often, as soon as they come into contact with the medium's psychic atmosphere and magnetism, they become confused, and their minds tend to wander as they would in delirium or in a state of trance. It is because of this that many of the messages we receive commence well, but afterwards dwindle off into incoherence and triviality. why many messages are, quote, trivial, unquote. This question of, quote, triviality, unquote, however, is often misunderstood. The objection is raised that spirits, if they really communicate, would tell us something more important than they usually do. As a matter of fact, however, this is only true in a certain sense. The ordinary social conversation between, quote, spirits in the flesh, unquote, is not as serious as it might be, and it has been shown by actual experiment that human beings, when called upon to prove their own identity to another, do deliberately choose trivial incidents by means of which to identify themselves. Another point is that trivial incidents serve best to prove identity, as some great philosophical discourse might be given by any intelligence, either in or out of the body, and would prove nothing to one longing to hear from his own dear one. In such a case, personal, detailed, and, so to say, trivial messages are often the most striking and the most convincing. The very triviality of many messages received through mediums is, therefore, their strongest point and not their weakest. In addition to this, there are, as we know, innumerable books written by spirits containing philosophical, scientific, and religious truths of great value and importance. Influence of the medium's organism. Another reason why communication is doubtless difficult is that the communicating spirit is unused to the bodily organism of the medium. All of us have certain mental and physical habits which we form, and it is easier for us to do certain things in certain ways after we have done them in that manner a few times. If you were suddenly transplanted into the body of another person, say one of the opposite sex, you would find great difficulty in manipulating that body so as to extract from it the best results, to think clearly and to speak and write clearly when expressing your thoughts. It is precisely this difficulty which the communicating intelligence experiences in trying to communicate with us through unfamiliar bodies. Many of the habits and, quote, tricks, unquote, so to say, of the medium creep into the messages, which are consequently often more or less similar to the language employed by the medium. This proves only that the spirit has to employ the medium's mental and bodily habits as best it can during the process of communication, and that it is not as easy and concise as many persons imagine. Symbolism necessary. Another difficulty presented is that the conditions on the, quote, other side, unquote, are doubtless so different from any which exist here that they have to be explained in roundabout and symbolic language. If you had to explain color to a blind man, you would find great difficulty in doing so. If you had to explain the feelings experienced while giving psychometric tests to one who had never experienced them, you would also find considerable difficulty. It is much the same in this case. There are no immediate analogies which can be drawn, and the result is that symbolism and a language which appears to us vague and unsatisfactory is often employed in describing the other side of life and the conditions which prevail therein. Difficulties of names and dates. Names and dates furnish great difficulty for returning spirits. Dates, because of the fact that time is not recognized by them in the same way that it is with us. Names, for the reason that they do not represent concrete pictures or meanings, but are, as a rule, only a combination of letters having a certain sound. The word, quote, chair, unquote, calls up to the mind a certain picture which can be visualized. On the other hand, the name, quote, Robinson, unquote, calls up no such picture, except perhaps the memory image of some friend of yours by that name. If that memory picture is revived in the communicator's mind, the medium can see this and describe it, which is precisely what he does. But the name, quote, Robinson, unquote, cannot be presented in picture form, the most common form of representation, and consequently is not easily communicated. As explained in the chapter on dreams, our hearing centers are less developed than our sight centers, and for this reason verbal messages are less easily given and received than pictured or visualized messages. The difficulty in receiving names is explained largely because of this fact. Communications immediately after death. For some days after death these difficulties are particularly great, and especially in the case of suicides. Dr. Hodgson, in his report of the case of Mrs. Piper, says, "that persons, just deceased, should be extremely confused and unable to communicate directly or even at all, seems perfectly natural after the shock and wrench of death. Thus, in one case, the spirit was unable to write the second day after his death. In another case, a friend of mine, whom I may call D, wrote, with what appeared to be much difficulty, his name and the words, 'I am all right, adieu,' within 2 or 3 days after his death. In another case, F, he was unable to write on the morning after his death. A few days later, when a stranger was present with me for a sitting, he wrote 2 or 3 sentences, saying, 'I am too weak to articulate clearly,' and not many days later he wrote fairly well and quite accurately, dictating also to Madame Eliza, the amanuensis, an account of his feelings when finding himself amid new surroundings. Both D and F became very clear in a short time. D communicated frequently, later on, both by writing and speech." Other difficulties. Other difficulties remain, such as the probable inability of the communicating spirit to see the material world as we see it, especially at the time of communication; the difficulty of holding the mind together while communicating; the difficulty of manipulating the medium's organism; and the intra-cosmic difficulties which exist between this world and the next. Because of all these hindrances and impediments, spirits find great difficulty in direct communication, and because of these facts, messages are, comparatively speaking, few, and in so many cases inconclusive. When a good medium, a good communicator, and a sympathetic sitter get together, however, very striking and convincing results are obtained, as we know from the history of spiritualism. End of chapter 29.